Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have one of the great heroines of our historical moment, the amazing Leslie Manookian. Welcome, Leslie.
Naomi, it is so fantastic to be here with you and back at you. You are unbelievable inspiration to me. So much of what you've written and said and done over the years really inspires me to do what I do now. So thank you for
Well,
having me.
those are kind words, and it's a mutual admiration society, as we say in high school. Thank you. But I also want to note for people who are, not necessarily familiar with what you've been doing recently, you come from a really interesting background. You have, very kind of classical elite education, and then you had years in finance. You were at Goldman Sachs, so in the belly of the beast or the beating heart
Yes.
of capitalism, depending on your perspective. And then you decided to kind of make a shift, and you produced a really important film, The Greater Good, about pharmaceuticals, and we'll be talking about that in the pharmacy industry. And now you've been doing something even more extraordinary. So I love talking to people. I mean, no one has a bio like yours, but I love talking to people with this kind of journey, because you're not railing at power structures you don't understand firsthand. So first, tell us a little bit about your journey, and then tell us about this project you've been working on quietly for the last year or so.
Yeah. So one other thing I did was I actually became a homeopath. So I was running Alliance Capitals. I left Goldman Sachs and went to Alliance Capital to run their European growth portfolio management and research businesses. And I was really sick and didn't know what was going on with me. And I kept going to the doctor, and he kept saying, doing all these tests. I was living in London, England at the time. And he said, I can't help you. Western medicine can't help you. You should go and see a homeopath or an acupuncturist. Yeah, I was sort of like, I was really into natural,
Mhm.
but I certainly wasn't into energy medicine. I didn't know anything about it. And so I started researching it, and found this woman who was highly respected and recommended, and waited for 3 months to get in to see her, and then had a session with her. And it was just really mind changing, just life changing. It was incredible what happened. So anyway, it was just a completely different approach to healing than I had ever understood. And it really changed my life, because it gave me a broader perspective about the mind body. We call it the connection, but it's really integration. Really, there's no separation.
Oh, you point, yeah.
We are one. Um, and um, and then it actually started to really kind of stem the tide. I was really sinking,
Did
and
the
it helped.
homeopath say what was wrong with you? Was there any diagnosis finally, or was it just?
Well, I had a bunch of issues, chronic conditions. Heavy metal toxicity
Oh,
was
wow.
one of the biggest ones. And yes, that I'd gotten from some pharmaceuticals before I went to Southeast Asia, before I started my job in New York City. I went to Southeast Asia with a bunch of friends when we all graduated from business school. And so that was one of them. And then that was really the crux of the matter. And then it caused all these chronic, I had
Interesting.
multiple chemical sensitivity. I had
Oh,
chronic migraines, numbness and tingling, all sorts of crazy stuff that all stemmed from that.
fascinating. And Western medicine probably would have taken years for you to figure out what was wrong with you, I imagine.
I
If
think Western medicine probably would have never tested me to find out if I had heavy metal toxicity.
no, and that's such a Western, like even Western medicine can understand that we're exposed to toxins, we're exposed to heavy metals. I mean, I had a friend. I mean, we could go on all day, but I had a friend who had an old battery in his closet, and everyone who lived in his house was getting migraines and exhaustion, and they all were being poisoned by heavy metals just from this old car battery or whatever it was, this old piece of machinery. um, so no, I'm a big believer, and I was roundly attacked for writing a book about the connection between cognition and sexuality in women. Oh, the mind body connection can't exist when it comes to human sexuality. Well, we take for granted that men are affected by their emotions and their thoughts. But I mean, we could go on forever, but I'm with you. You're preaching to the choir
Yeah.
about this. So you've been in very right brain and very left brain worlds. Let's put it that way. And you
Yes.
produced this excellent movie, which I noticed Google calls a propaganda movie about vaccines and pharmaceuticals. That comes right up. So, what was your experience with bringing out this movie, and what were the key messages of the greater good?
Yeah. Well, the whole reason I made the film was because when I started in homeopathy school, the very first day there was a guy, leading orientation, and he said, "Oh, we're going to talk about the mind-body connection over the next few years, and we're going to talk about nutrition and blockages to cure and vaccine damage." And I raised my hand and I said, "What are you talking about? They're the greatest invention of humankind." And he said, "Well, that's one perspective, and we're going to learn about another."
Wow.
And after the class, he gave me a book to read, and it was a book called "Are Vaccines Really Safe and Effective?" And I mean, I'm a kind of a nerdy, analytical geek kind of a person. So the first thing I did was look at the back of the book, and it had over 950 or 60 footnotes
Wow.
to the medical literature.
Wow.
And I thought, this can't be right. So then I read it and I was like, wow, there's a huge spectrum of acknowledged injuries. And I had no idea.
Wow.
And I thought, I've really got to figure this out. Is this really real or not? And so that was the impetus behind making the film, is that I just learned about there even was a debate, because I had no idea there was a debate. So the goal of the film was to do all this research. So I researched it for 7 years and then started production on it. And the goal was to share with the public that there is a debate, that there are valid arguments, to those who have concerns, to share some of the stories, but most importantly, to let the experts argue it out on screen and let you then as a viewer decide what you wanted to believe and what path you wanted to choose for yourself. And that was considered heresy. Yeah. Right? I mean, that was positively heretical. It was outrageous. I mean, the New York Times completely smeared us, tried to frame us, lied about us, absolutely lied.
What, could you be more specific? I mean, what did they say? They've lied about me too, which shocked and horrified me. And then I had like the two most eminent 19th century historians on the thread with the corrections editor at the New York Times saying, "Naomi's right, you guys are wrong," and they still didn't correct it. So yeah. I believe you, but what did they say about you guys that was a lie?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have that kind of pedigree at that point, and anyway, they'd still attack me now, but basically they lied and said that we complained about their review of the film. So what happened was we premiered in Los Angeles and we got a great review from the Wall Street Journal Online and from the LA Weekly, I think is what it was. Really, really positive, saying that the information that was being shared was jaw-dropping and all this stuff, and that it was so well referenced. And I mean, every single statement is referenced scientifically. Wow. We had it vetted by the top immunologist, autoimmunity guy in the world, and a prominent pediatrician. And so, everything was perfect about it, right? And so we had these two fantastic reviews. We caught them off guard. But 3 weeks later, when we went to New York to go and do our premiere in New York, they were ready for us. Oh. And so they wrote a review that was just lies. It was not either they'd not watched the film or it was
or saying that it wasn't true.
They said that we dismissed any issues with respect to dangers of illnesses. Oh. We showed children on crutches, in braces, in iron lungs with polio. They just lied. And so we asked them, and then we said, listen, this isn't accurate. And so they changed it. And they literally had, my guess is somebody from the industry wrote a hit job, which was the review. And then they didn't want to stand by it. So they tried to smear us to make us look like we were little crybabies, And then what happened was one of my film partners went to Sundance that year, and the director of documentary programming took him aside and said, "We wanted your film in. My hands were tied from above."
I believe it. All right.
Just gives me the chills to even think about it.
But we're seeing it in every industry now. And this was like trial balloons, a practice run, or maybe it was just happening routinely to everyone, even back then, who tried to question this gigantically powerful industry. And I have a confession to make, which is, for most of my life till very recently, I kind of bought it. I kind of thought, I believed it. I thought people who criticize vaccines are marginal. I didn't think there was nothing there because I, believe in looking at the evidence, and I hadn't looked at the evidence for myself, but I thought they were directing their energy poorly, considering how sacred vaccines are and how much good they delivered to humanity. It honestly wasn't until I met people in your community and started reading the sources that your community is producing that I realized these are super mainstream, thoughtful, well-informed people. They are not fanatics. They're not cultists. The medical freedom community is one of the best informed, best educated groups of people I've ever met. And I can't think of one who doesn't use primary source citations when they talk. So I think that there is a there. And now, of course, just by being open to looking at what I'm being shown from the medical freedom community, now I'm being called an anti-vaxxer. So I see how, and deplatformed. So I see how powerful this machinery is. So let's go now to what you're doing. I mean, one of the things I love about you and that inspires me, and honestly, I think women of our generation are sort of leading this battle for liberty where I look, and that's partisan. But having said that, you have been, as you said, flying under the radar for the last year, but doing something incredibly impactful, and you've recently had some big results. So please unveil your project.
Yes. Well, let me just say, first of all, that when early 2020 came and there were reports that there was some new disease in China, I knew where it was going, which was to lockdowns and serious public health measures and things like this. And the reason that I knew that is because of the 20 years of research I've been doing on vaccine. And people have to understand that many of the steps, there have been many steps to get us to the place where we are in the last year. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't just a response to what's happened. And I know that's really kind of alarming and perhaps hard for people to digest, but people have to understand that our rights have been eroded for decades to actually facilitate the draconian measures that we've seen happen in the last year and a half. Okay.
Well, I really want to hear what you have to say. And again, you're speaking to someone who's open to a message that dark, because I too, from a different perspective, have been investigating what's happening to us since March of 2020. And all of the evidence leads to the darkest possible script with the most senior forces. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just where we are, as you say. So I want to hear your piece of it. I want to hear your perspective on it. And I also just want to say, I want to validate you before you go on, because something I noticed for years was the incredible ton of bricks that anyone who criticized vaccines, had dropped on them. And this was going back to the 20-aughts. And I really thought, why are they putting such, like, granted, it's a big industry, they don't want critics, but it just seemed like disproportionate firepower. And in retrospect, it was disproportionate firepower, for a reason. I mean, big guns were always there. And I remember even noticing that double X, anti-vaxxer, when it kind of debuted, and thinking, wow, there's I recognize a coordinated PR campaign when I see one. And even several years ago, I began thinking, there's some agency that's been hired to get these talking points out and paint everyone who raises perfectly reasonable questions you can raise about diabetes or obesity or, heart disease as an absolute lunatic. And I thought, well, that industries don't spend that kind of money unless there's a lot at stake or unless they're planning for the future. So now lay it on us, Leslie. Tell us what you see.
So first, one thing that's really important for viewers to understand is that the vaccine makers don't only have no liability for their COVID shots, they have no liability for any shots in this country.
Go on.
Okay, that started in 1986. They were being sued so much in the late 70s and 80s, and juries were awarding millions and millions of dollars to the families of children who were catastrophically injured, brain injured, generally speaking, that they basically held Congress hostage and said, if you don't provide us with financial and legal immunity, we won't make shots anymore.
Oh my gosh.
That's what happened.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And so now we actually have no control measure, right? Like one of the greatest incentives for a corporation to do good is the fear of liability.
Right.
There is none of that.
No liability. Does any other industry have no liability? I mean, that's so
Well,
bizarre.
actually, some people are saying that the telecoms manufacturers for 5G and wireless don't either. I have read that, but I haven't investigated in depth. But no other industry has what the pharmaceutical industry has for their shots.
I don't even understand how legally you can carve out no liability for a whole industry. It just
What they did was they set up a special court called Vaccine Court under the Federal Court of Claims. And if you or your child are injured or killed by a vaccine, and federal law recognizes that vaccines injure and kill some recipients, if you are a victim, you have to go to the Special Court of Claims and apply. And it was supposed to be a good thing to help parents who were grieving, injured or killed children. And what's happened is they just twisted it and twisted it and twisted it to make it more and more beneficial and restrict it for parents and more beneficial to the pharmaceutical industry. So what happens is now you have to go and you have your case heard in front of a special master, which is this US government appointed and funded kind of a judge. There's no due process. There's no discovery. There's no jury. This guy sits as judge and jury over the whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and 75% of the 75 to 80% of all of the applications are rejected, denied, and they keep narrowing the table of compensable events in order to make it so difficult. So anyway, the point is, this happened in the 80s, and of course I knew about that, and I also knew that the Patriot Act allowed warrantless searches of us, right?
Right.
And that was passed within 45 days of 9/11, which is quite extraordinary.
Yes.
And then the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act legislation was introduced a couple of weeks after the Patriot Act, and that accorded extraordinary powers to state health departments and governors in the event of disease outbreaks. This is back in 2001. And then in 2005, the PrEP Act allowed the Secretary of HHS to declare an emergency, and the PrEP Act then granted immunity to the pharmaceutical industry or anybody who created what's called a countermeasure.
Oh God.
For all liability. The only way that you can actually go after anybody, the tests, you can't sue them about the tests, you can't sue them for dangers from masks or harms from masks or the shots.
Oh my God.
Unless you can prove willful misconduct, which is almost impossible.
Oh my God. So Leslie, listening as, with my political consultant hat on, those laws create a perfect storm of incentive to declare a public health emergency and to have your contractors lined up to cash in with no liability for more and more and more complex and elaborate mandated processes, coverings, injections, whatever they can conjure. Is that not?
100%. And it's even worse because it's not just the US that's done this, but the World Health Organization has changed its charter such that whenever it decrees a pandemic, it's binding all the member states.
My God.
Yes. So that was declared. I'm not sure how it might have been tweaked, but that was what they declared. That they changed it within a year or two before the swine flu epidemic in 2009. So anyway, this is all to say, okay. And then in 2012, have you heard about the?
Can I just interrupt there?
Of course.
So what that means is the World Health Organization has the power to mint money for all of these entities by simply declaring a pandemic.
And it's worse too, because you know what happens? They actually also sign contracts with all of the vaccine producers, which are automatically activated. That's what happened in 2009 with the swine flu. It automatically triggered these license agreements. And I don't know if you've heard about the Pfizer documents, but the Pfizer leak that's come out, they have signed contracts with all of these developing world countries in Latin America and other places, such that even if a cure for COVID is developed, these countries are still bound to pay for the shots that they have
Oh my God. At this
contracted.
so basically there's a machine that's been legally created, and the head of the machine is the WHO, and it has an incentive to declare pandemics forever, over and over, which is why Gates and other people so confidently keep declaring there will be more pandemics, because it is a word, right? I'm guessing there's no objective measure that the WHO has to meet in order to press that trigger of declaring a pandemic. Is that correct?
Well, they changed the definition last year to make it much easier.
Uh, because I keep looking up what is a pandemic in Webster's, and we're not in a pandemic in Webster's. It's not death
No.
and disease over a broad swath of the geographical area.
So I don't remember all the specifics, but it used to be that there was a high fatality rate and it was widespread and all these things. And the actuality is that I believe the official data is that the fatality rate is 0.14%, which is very much in line with a bad seasonal flu. And
Exactly.
so we're nowhere near that, but
So
they changed
they
the definition in order to make it easier. Yeah. So
so
they,
basically, if there's a bad seasonal flu, they can declare that there's a pandemic.
yeah,
Or
essentially now.
if they keep fudging died with X or died with Y, they can declare that there's a pandemic. So this is a giant incentive, profit incentive machine that will burden us forever unless we dismantle it. And this is why the word pandemic has become so religious. Like, you can't question it. I mean, people when I start saying to people, there's like this soundbite, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Well, we're not in the middle of a pandemic statistically, and we're moving into endemic, according to distinguished epidemiologists. But when you say, no, we're not in the middle of a pandemic, people react now as if you're saying there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no, Christmas. It's the untouchable. It's he who must not, he who must be obeyed is this pandemic.
Yes.
Now I understand why. This is catastrophic. So there's a giant global mafia that has been created, in which the P word results in all these member states being bound, results in the hyper empowerment of Fauci and Walensky, presumably financially, results in multiple billions of dollars for the industries tapped by this pandemic, usually vaccines, results in distortion of medical practice. What you've just said explains a lot. Like, by going up the ladder of influence, and talking to very senior doctors, and they've referenced licensing boards, I've gotten to the top of the second level, but you've just explained the top of the top level. And that goes a long way to explaining what's going on now.
Okay, it's really important to understand that there was clear collaboration occurring between our Centers for Disease Control and China's.
Okay.
And there is irrefutable evidence that Dr. Anthony Fauci, through EcoHealth Alliance, was channeling funds. I know some people in the mainstream media will deride this, but you can, if you look at the original documents, you can see this. And the people who report on it are derided as conspiracy theorists, but there is clear evidence that we were funding, through EcoHealth Alliance, gain of function research in China.
There's no question. I mean, I read the peer studies last November, and my husband and I sat there reading Nature's publication of the peer-reviewed studies coming out of Wuhan and funded by the NIH. And we looked at each other like, how is this being reported as a conspiracy theory? The documents are right here. So you don't have to persuade me, because I've seen that primary research. I also got deplatformed from Twitter for posting Dr. Ralph Barrick's CV, which also shows NIH funding by the tune of millions of dollars, gain of function research, and then his research collaborating with Bat Lady Xi Jinping in Wuhan. And unfortunately, my husband, who's a private detective, just showed me something that I'm going to tell you last night, which shocked and horrified me. He showed me that One Health, that global One Health Gates entity, has a government website in our government.
Okay, you have to show me this afterwards, because let's get to what I'm doing now, right?
Okay,
this is so important for this.
Right.
So all of this, and I also want to make sure that we understand this, though, that China and the United States Department of Defense were funding Ralph Baric.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did see that. So what does
Okay.
that mean?
And China's Department of Defense and the US Department of Defense were funding Charles Lieber at Harvard, doing all this nanotechnology
Is
stuff.
he the guy? Okay, is he the
He's
guy
the guy
who
who
was the spy for China?
he was the guy who got arrested in January of 2020 for not disclosing his connections to the Chinese. And then one of his lab assistants, he had two lab assistants, or two lab technicians, I don't know what the official term for it is, that they both were Chinese military. Okay. But one of them was arrested at Boston's Logan Airport on his way back to China with 20 some odd vials of some biologic in his socks in January of 2020.
Wow.
Okay. And my point is, it wasn't just China that was funding, the United States Department of Defense was funding them too. This is important to understand that I believe that what we're dealing with is this massive web that is the pharmaceutical industry, the chemicals industry, intelligence, and military, and
Well,
health, of course.
what incentive would the Department of Defense have for collaborating with an adversary or a rival superpower on a possible bioweapon? I mean, that's a really scary thought. And
Yeah. So two things I want to say on that. One is that, China has invested, you also asked about China. China has invested billions and billions into American colleges and universities.
that I'm aware of. Yeah.
That's an open, secret. And I'm talking
Billions.
tons and tons of money, right?
Absolutely.
So, and we also know the pharmaceutical industry has invested, and so does the chemical industry. All of, these big industries invest in our hospitals, our research centers, all these things. And so they have a big, big, big place at the table.
Right.
That's one thing. With respect to, and I think that kind of connects to the other question, which is what incentive do they have? Well, I mean, do you want to talk about the Great Reset or not? Because so I think the question is, I think it's really, really hard thing to address, Naomi, without going into quote unquote conspiracy theory territory. If you look at what's happening, there is an effort. The Great Reset says, this is what's being put out by the World Economic Forum, that the United States will no longer be the superpower, and instead the world will be run by a collection of countries, and they show an image of all the flags at the United Nations. Okay, so I think you can kind of connect the dots that maybe that is a potential or a plausible explanation for this kind of collaboration.
That would suggest that there are rogue elements in the United States military who are on board with the Great Reset.
Well, look at our media. You don't think our media is on board?
I totally think our media is, and I've also seen the primary sources showing that Gates has funded a lot of our current media. But I guess, and I'm also a military spouse, so this is like a hard thing to listen to, but I guess I do sentimentalize, the whole United States military to some extent. I can't believe the leadership at that high level would be treasonous and would collaborate. I mean, they might have inadvertently collaborated, thinking the best of the Chinese scientists, with the reassurances of Dr. Fauci to create something that could be a bioweapon, the way France collaborated with the Chinese to create something that could be a bioweapon. But I would hate to think that our own military, might be trying to harm our own population. That would be very painful if there's truth to that.
Well, but we wouldn't want to think that the CDC is concealing information from us about vaccines, would we?
No, but I've already.
True. And we wouldn't want to think that FDA would be doing the same thing. And, the estimates are that maybe up to 500,000 people died from Vioxx, and FDA knew for years.
Wow.
We don't want to think these things, but you know what? The Bayh-Dole Act allowed, it was passed in 1980, and it allows government officials funded by taxpayer dollars to retain the intellectual property rights to their inventions. So they have a direct financial interest for doing something. And my point is that, listen, we don't want to believe any of these horrible things. They're horrible to believe. I didn't want to believe that vaccines could cause harm. I mean, I always got them all.
All right, well then let's, in a real democracy, one would be investigating and asking questions about the fact, which is proven, that DOD did collaborate to fund some of these bioweapons, or
Yeah.
some of this gain of function research, I should say. Well, let me go back for a minute to patents. And you're a great person to ask about this. Uh, One thing I found when I was researching Dr. Fauci, because I had a strong instinct based on my life as a White House spouse long ago in the Clinton era, and as an advisor to a presidential campaign and to a vice president, that Dr. Fauci doesn't act like he's working for us, right? He doesn't he behaves with impunity. He makes fun of sitting presidents. He contradicts other sitting presidents. He yells at senators. I mean, he does not behave like a bureaucrat who is in a chain of command that ends with the president of the United States. He acts like he's got powerful protectors that are not in the chain of command. So, having said that, that's my observation.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, I found that he has, I believe, 8 patents in his name, and some of them are for HIV vaccines. And I was very struck when people were diving into the gain of function research that there was some discussion. I'm not a scientist. I haven't done the research you've done, but there was some discussion that they were made more infectious by splicing aspects of HIV into the coronavirus
Genetic code.
Yeah. And I also am aware that his wife sits in the NIH in another role, in giving kind of the ethical thumbs up to HIV vaccines, which seems like a clear conflict of interest. But having said all of that, is there any way, and if there isn't, we'll just cut this, that Dr. Fauci is profiting from the current mRNA vaccines? Do they use HIV vaccine technology?
They don't just use, NIAID developed Moderna's vaccine, COVID vaccine. They developed it and they own half the patent. And so do 4 other people in his lab aside from him.
Oh my God. Wait, you're saying Dr. Fauci himself owns some of the patents for the Moderna vaccine? Are you kidding me?
He and 4 people, I mean, it's a handful of people, including himself in his lab, they developed the mRNA technology that's being used in the Moderna shot.
So
and then
I understand that they developed it, but is Fauci?
And they own half the patent on it.
No. Are you serious?
99.9999999. I mean, yes, 100%. It's true. It's a fact.
Will you? So send me your sources for that. So Dr. Fauci is promoting vaccines that he personally gets royalties from,
and his staff.
And his staff.
Yeah. Up to $150,000 a year per individual per patent.
And he has 8 patents. But
I can't comment on that. I just know that NIAID developed the Moderna mRNA vaccine
the money
technology.
goes to the employees of NIAID rather than to the government itself. Is that correct?
This is what happened with the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980.
Gotcha. They get to keep the fruits of their labors if it's
part of it. They get up to 150 grand a year per patent.
So he gets
per person,
as long as there's a campaign, get vaccinated, as long as he can coerce schools and private industry to mandate vaccines. Dr. Fauci is personally making up to an additional $150,000 a year per patent. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, he can make $150,000 per year per patent that he owns. Yes.
Wow.
And I don't know how many they have specifically on the Moderna shot, but NIAID, his group, did develop that technology. And I mean, you can hear like Dr. Robert Malone, who's one of the inventors of the technology. He and others, I think Dr. Malone, maybe it's someone else, but you can read about it and you hear these scientists talking about it. Well, the Moderna shot is the NIAID shot.
I just didn't know the money flowed back to the employees of the NIAID.
Yes, yes.
That is an unbelievable.
Same thing with the Gardasil shot that came out in 2006. They, NIH employees co-developed that and they retained part of the patent rights.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Wow. All right. Well, that's it. So moving right along, let's talk about what you've been doing in the field of this tyranny.
Yeah. So all of this, basically, when this happened in January of 2020, I was like, oh my gosh, it's finally like they're going to really, go crazy on us and use all this stuff that's been put in place for many, many years. And um, just so happened that an incredible lawyer who's an international commercial litigator was brought into my life at the end of 2019. And we were involved in a business transaction, but we kind of hit it off and we started talking, and I would share with him, well, the vaccine makers don't have any liability. And he'd be like, come on, that can't be true. And then he'd go and look it up and he'd call me back. Oh my gosh, this is true. Oh, there's this kangaroo vaccine court that you go to, no due process, no discovery, no jury. He'd say, it can't be right. And then he'd come back to me, oh my gosh. Well, anyway, he said to me in the spring of 2020, we were talking, and he said, somebody's got to do something about this. And I said, you know what, George, you're right. Somebody does, and that's you and me. Now, this is a man who's taken down some of the biggest corporations in the world, right? He is, which is a very different skill set. He is someone who made his career in federal court, which is very different from a state or local court. It's a completely different ball of wax. It's where the big boys play, right?
Right.
And this is a guy who knows it. And he's also at the end of his career. I mean, he was preparing himself to phase out, right? Retire. He's been a lawyer for 38 years. He was in the Reagan administration, actually. He's the only living lawyer who served in that administration. But anyway, that's an aside. He got really fired up, and I started telling him all these things, and he just thought, this is wrong. I've given myself to the law, and this is wrong. This is wrong, and we need to change it. And people were talking about mask mandates and all these kinds of things. And I started going out and talking to a couple of the people who had donated to me to make the movie, The Greater Good. And they said, we would love to support you. And so I founded Health Freedom Defense Fund, which is healthfreedomdefense.org. And basically started planning to litigate what we knew was coming, which was mask mandates, test mandates, and vaccine mandates. And the first lawsuit that we filed was this past March against the Los Angeles Unified School District, who the superintendent was all over the media for the preceding 2 months saying that, we're going to mandate the shot, we're going to mandate the shot, and on and on and on. And they were even emailing their staff that they were going to mandate the shot in the operations department. And they even were telling people in private meetings at their union meetings that they were going to mandate the shot. I mean, Linda Del Cueto, who's the HR director. So we filed suit, and the next day they changed their policy. They walked it right back.
Oh my God, I just woke my dog up. That's amazing. Oh my God.
So it didn't end the lawsuit right there, but I mean, they walked it back. They kept, we're not doing this. But then they wouldn't say to the court, their general counsel told us that they would stipulate to the court that they weren't going to mandate the EUA shot. So while a product, whether it's a mask, a test, or a vaccine, is issued under emergency use authorization, it can't be mandated.
Right.
Okay, that is federal law.
I love it. So that's an open and shut case. I mean, you're on very strong ground. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like this is not a frivolous lawsuit.
No.
You're likely to win. So whom were you suing? Were you suing the individuals, which would be satisfying?
We did all. We did the Los Angeles Unified School District, the superintendent, and the head of HR.
Love it.
And so what was great is that their general counsel said, you're right. Oh my gosh, yeah, sure, I'll get you to stipulate to the court. And then they just started stalling us for a month. They wouldn't accept service after telling us they would. They wouldn't stipulate to the court. They wouldn't do all these things. They just played games with us for a month. And I mean, I think that this is just how they operate. They're just, I mean, all I can say is that based on the experiences I've had is that they're not honorable people.
Right.
They're just not. So,
right. I mean,
but so they dragged it out.
Yes.
And then finally, last week, we got resolution that the judge said, listen, they said that they're not going to mandate. They don't have a policy now, so it's not right. So basically, they represented 8 times in their motion to dismiss that they did not have this policy and weren't going to implement the policy. So the judge said, okay, dismissed without prejudice, meaning that we can refile if they ever try it again.
Oh, beautiful.
That was huge for us. Yeah.
So really the parents and children and probably teachers of Los Angeles owe you a huge debt, right? I mean, I get emails every day from frantic parents saying, and
Mm.
I'm a frantic step parent. My stepchild is going to be masked for no reason this fall in Massachusetts. But there are millions of parents and kids who owe their freedom to breathe and to have social and emotional learning and to communicate clearly and not to be injected with an experimental procedure to you, Leslie, and your funders and your colleague. Tell me his name so we can give him a shout out, his full name, if he's willing to be named.
My general counsel?
Yes.
Oh yeah, George Wentz. He's a partner at the Davalier Law Group, and they are our legal representation. Yeah, they are just. Let me tell you, he's a strategic legal genius in my view. Yeah.
Thank God for what you're doing. So what's next? So basically, you're going to sue everybody, right?
So we're suing so many. So we sued a city in the state of Idaho, and they actually rescinded their mandate the day that we sued. Now, they say it wasn't connected, but we have been putting pressure on them for months and months and months. And now there's a bunch of people kind of clamoring for them to reinstate a mask mandate. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens, because that is waiting in the wings if they do it. And
who is clamoring? Who are these people behind the mask mandates? What's driving the school boards? What's driving the teachers unions? This doesn't.
I think it's two things. This is my perspective. Okay. One of the things is that you have an incredibly politicized media, right? So there are these media outlets that are really pushing an agenda, not reporting on the truth or the science or the true data. And they are the ones that are purveying fear for the most part, right? So they've got their constantly running death ticker and cases ticker and all these things. I mean, if you take a step back, you can see what's happening, which is that they are trying to keep people in a state of fear, because when people are in fear, their higher functioning, cognitive functioning shuts down, and then they are much more submissive, right?
Yeah, of course. I understand, but I guess
that's one piece.
Okay, so tell me why it's aimed at children, especially. And I also looked at Gates's 1099s, and there's millions of funding for K-9 education. So I just feel like someone is influencing or buying the teachers unions and school boards. Do you have any knowledge of that? If you don't, you don't. I'm just asking.
No, I do. Actually, this is an hour on itself, Naomi, but there's an amazing book that was written in 1971, and it's called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And it investigates, and there was a Reese committee hearing in the 1960s or 70s, I forget. Those were conducted by a congressman. I can't remember if he was a senator or a representative, but Reese. And what they investigated was the activities of these giant nonprofit foundations, in particular, these private foundations. And the guy who captained the whole investigation for the Reese committee was a guy named Norman Dodd. And if you search him up on YouTube, you can see videos that he's talking about where he says that the executive directors of these family foundations actually let him come inside, review what they were doing, because he had the charge of this congressional committee to investigate. And they told him that they were trying to install collectivism in America. That was their objective.
Oh my God.
I'm not kidding you.
I believe you. What family foundations are they? Can you name them? Oh, I don't put you on the spot. Wow. All right. So
yes, of course. I mean, it's all the kind of names that you would think of.
I wouldn't have thought that big wealthy families would want Marxism in America. I would have thought they want not Marxism in America.
Think about it. Okay, so first of all, I don't believe we have capitalism in America.
No,
I believe we have crony capitalism, and oligarchical crony capitalistic system. It's not capitalism, right? Because if we had capitalism, we wouldn't have these behemoths that control our worlds. They would not be allowed to have that much power, and we would not have Glass-Steagall repealed, all the antitrust laws, all these kinds of things. When I first started in Wall Street in the early 1990s, it was constantly a conversation. Will oh my gosh, MCI be able to buy this wireless provider? Will there be a merger between them and AT&T? Is it antitrust? And it was shocking, because in the beginning there were all of these mergers that were rejected, and then in a few years they started letting them happen. So that all is to say, if you are a really big wig, or you want to be a really big wig, Do you want to fight a million competitors or a couple?
Right. And you can do deals with a couple. Gotcha. All right. So
And
then,
if you want an educational system that supports collectivism, what
so
do you do?
you're not talking about classical Marxism where the people own the means of production. You're talking about a kind of collectivist feudalism where there's a handful of oligarchs and everyone else doesn't have anything and equally doesn't have anything. Is that what you're talking about?
Have you seen the 90-second video that the World Economic Forum put out 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
Shocked me. Yes. Yes.
8 predictions for 2030. What's the number one thing?
You won't own anything and you'll be happy. Exactly. Yeah, no, and yes, collectivism does a good job with that. And I see it. I mean, in another hour, we can talk about the real estate.
And look at BlackRock is going out buying up 20,000 homes in Florida and all these things. So to me, there are a variety of agendas that are at work right now.
Okay, so now let's go back to the other people that you're going to sue, because sadly we only have a few more minutes.
Okay.
And I know our audience is especially excited at, at the thought of you and George Wentz with flaming swords of justice pursuing these people and making them back off the minute they get the lawyer's letter.
But we sued the Biden administration over their travel mask mandate.
Oh my God, that was you. That's right. I was so proud when I read about that. So how's that going? That's
fantastic. Now it's really interesting because when you sue a private individual or anybody other than the federal government, they have like 20 days to come back to you. The government gets 60.
Well, it's the middle of a pandemic.
Yes, so they're busy. So anyway,
so basically you've sued them, but you haven't heard back.
Because we're suing the CDC, Department of Health and Human Services. So we're suing Walensky, who is the head of CDC. We're suing the Secretary of HHS, and we're suing President Biden.
Love it. I love it. And what is the basis of your suit? That they're lying? That they're
listen, federal law states that emergency use authorized products cannot be mandated, that the wearer or user has the option to accept or refuse, okay? All masks in America, except maybe a very narrowly defined N95 respirator, but I think even those might fall under it, are issued under emergency use authorization. They can't be mandated. So that's illegal.
I love it. So basically that what they're trying to do is illegal.
Yes, but there's two other pieces to it. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that the federal government doesn't have power, an executive agency. So, we have 3 branches of government. The federal agencies fall under the executive, not the legislative.
Yes.
Congress legislated that emergency use authorized products must be optional.
Right.
And now you have the CDC saying, we're going to mandate them. Sorry, can't do that.
They're grabbing powers that belong to Congress. They don't have those powers. They're overreaching in our system of government. Love that. That's a true democracy lover. What is democracy?
Yes. And on top of that, if they then argue, well, we are empowered to make rules and regulations, we say, yes, you are, but you didn't follow the process. There was no notification and there was no public input.
That's right. There's no public input to any of it.
No, none of this.
May I just note, as a law nerd, I am not a lawyer, but I'm a law nerd. It makes me crazy to see what the CDC says or what Dr. Fauci says framed as you can do this or you can't do that. It's a mandate. It's an edict. They're advisors. They don't have the power, especially Dr. Fauci. He is an advisor. He doesn't have the power to mandate shit, right?
Exactly. No.
And we're a democracy. Even President Biden doesn't have the power to issue an edict. That's what a monarchy does.
And he wrote an executive order about this. And then they had some third tier person at CDC write it. And you know what? The whole thing is on the basis, mask mandates are on the basis of the quarantining powers that they have with respect to animals that are brought into the country.
Oh my God. That's a nonsensical legal basis.
Yeah. So anyway, none of it makes any sense. But listen, a lot of what we're dealing with doesn't make sense. And so we drew a very good judge in the federal middle district of Florida. So it's the middle district of Florida in federal court. And we are, very optimistic about the Supreme Court's ruling and also the 11th Circuit, which has said that the CDC overstepped its bounds with respect to the Florida cruise lines. there's been a bunch of different things. So, we're excited about that. And then we've also got something else, which we just did last week,
Yes.
which is fantastic. So this is another great democracy in action lawsuit. And that is that the Arizona State Legislature, June 29th, passed legislation saying that no mandates of any kind can be implemented by schools in Arizona.
Love it.
Okay, now listen, that doesn't say a parent can't put a mask on their kid if they choose,
Right.
or vaccinate their kid, but it can't be mandated by
Right.
the school district, right? So they passed this law.
Right.
Well, what do you think the school district, the Phoenix Union High School District in Maricopa County did? They said, we're going to take our cue from the CDC and we're mandating them for all staff and students, okay, in direct violation. And they argue, well, the law doesn't take effect for 90 days, and so it's not binding. But clearly their intent was to have it take effect right away. And, you can argue about what's right or not. But the point is that and this kind of comes back to the collectivism thing. And I think this attempt to transfer power from the states to the feds, because it's much easier
to control,
right? It's much harder for them to control 50 states.
We're seeing that. I mean, America's the last holdout as France and England and Italy are being crushed underfoot.
Exactly, because of our structure, because of the checks and balances designed into our system by our founding fathers. Thank you. I mean, amen to all of them, right? It's just
so prescient.
Oh my gosh, they were just unbelievable human beings.
Yeah, but they were counting on people like you to actually get off our couches
exactly.
and hire a lawyer and raise money.
And So, and exactly. So, I've been working literally, my husband can't believe it, 16 hours a day, almost every day of the week.
Oh my gosh.
For a year and a half, raising as much money as I possibly can, because we have some huge lawsuits in the works. And so let me just finish on this Arizona thing, because it's really important.
Okay.
And that is that people need to understand that the Constitution reserved police powers to the state. All the states have those. And underneath police powers are things like health.
Right.
The federal government cannot regulate health issues. The states do it. It's reserved to the states.
I don't like him, but that's what President Trump was trying to say, right?
Exactly. And so what's happening is this lawsuit and this school district, it's interesting because, the school district is pushing, I think schools in America are pushing collectivism as well. That's why I'm talking about this.
Right.
In order to get, and they've been doing it for decades and decades, and they've been doing it from the funding of these foundations, okay? Right. And so that brings you to here what we're dealing with now, where this school district is saying, we don't care what state lies. We're going to take our orders from the CDC.
From the federal
CDC can't make orders. And we don't, and all they can do is make recommendations, and then the states implement what they deem appropriate. Right. So this is a big, this is literally a war that's being waged over state rights and federal rights and power. Absolutely. And that's really important.
And so you and George Wentz are at the forefront of this war, battling to retain the system that our founders have given us, as well as fighting to make sure that everyone has bodily autonomy, as the Constitution and the Nuremberg Codes and HIPAA and the Equality Act, all of
and
them.
The Declaration of Helsinki and the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics and Medicine. Yes. We don't experiment on humans, and we don't practice medicine through force.
Exactly right. And I read The Nazi Doctors years ago, and I think of the Nazi doctors all the time, because what came out of those medical experiments are global binding laws that say you can't do what is now being done to people. Well, you are incredible. So how can we help? I'm sure that we're going to have you back. You're going to tell us about future victories, hopefully only victories. How much money do you need to raise? And let me get the word out to all of our friends to send you donations.
So we have a major elite university we are working on. We're about to sue them over their vaccine mandate. And we also have a major civil conspiracy case in the works to expose the wrongdoing of all the bad actors at the top.
I love
Gates
everything.
and
I
Fauci and all of these people.
I
Yep.
love it.
So I just want you guys to know that we have so much. And I
Will you
mean,
come back
listen,
and talk to us about those last two things?
absolutely. Absolutely. So to come full circle to what you can do is go to healthfreedomdefense.org and donate. These actions, you know,
They're expensive.
they're the small ones can be hundreds of thousands of dollars if they go to court. The big ones will be in the millions. And so, I mean, listen, I'm appealing to anybody who really truly cares about preserving our system of government to come and help us.
Absolutely.
Because we need it. And, you know, I have literally, I believe, the best legal team in the whole health freedom arena. These guys are just amazing. They have sued the federal government, the UC system. They've sued, you know, the biggest corporations. I mean, the entire board of Siemens in Germany, one of the biggest corporations in the world, had to resign because George exposed their fraud.
Wow. So I just want to chime in and say, I don't think you have the best health freedom team. I think you have the best freedom team. Certainly one of the best freedom teams out there. What you're doing is much bigger than health freedom.
100%. You're right. You're right.
I want to chime in to your appeal for funds to add my appeal to everyone watching to send as much as you can to Leslie and her team. Because what people have to understand about these lawsuits is, yes, they're expensive, but once the decision is made, it protects everyone, right?
Yeah.
Once the decision is made, it's like armor around us, keeping us from the outcomes that these bad actors clearly are rolling out very, very quickly. So I could talk to you for hours more. We want to have you back as often as you want to come back. I can't thank you enough. And the website again is
healthfreedomdefense.org. And Naomi, I can't thank you enough. So fantastic conversation. So much.
Yeah. Arms. And thank you so much. And thank your colleagues for us all as well. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Naomi. It's been great.